advocate for backend, and he's going to teach us how to really easily build I guess, the Angular 2 plus Ionic 2 plus backend, and how to build an app using those three things.
Thank you, Tracy. To be perfectly honest, my presentation is going to be a little light on the Angular 2 and Ionic 2 specific side, since we're primarily focused on the back end, which, to be perfectly honest, is effectively independent of Angular 2 and Ionic. And let me restart my presentation and share my screen just a moment.
Are you recording? Making sure.
Yeah, I am recording via QuickTime, and I'm intentionally not sharing my screen right now while I get the slideshow ready.
Awesome.
There we go. Okay. Let me see. All right, share screen. Share entire screen. All right, you should hopefully see a PowerPoint presentation with the initial slide. All right. As Tracy mentioned, my name is Matt Billock. I'm a developer advocate with Backand. What that essentially means is that I evangelize Backand's technologies and leverage my prior experience as a developer in other languages to help translate the technical concepts from a bunch of very smart people who come up with a lot of really great ideas and then just want to translate those into more relatable format. So we're going to talk through Backend today and discuss how Backend-as-a-service for Angular and Ionic, specifically Angular and Ionic 2, can really accelerate your web development. It's actually kind of fortuitous that Devin was demonstrating a to-do app, because we're going to be doing pretty much exactly the same thing, just with full backend support over the web. All right, so our agenda today is five questions. We're going to use these 5 questions as a series of lenses with which to explore what Backend-as-a-service can offer for your application, as well as how you can leverage Backend-as-a-service with Angular 2 and Ionic 2 to truly accelerate both your application and any future development if you settle upon a good pattern. So our first question, why do we want to use Backend-as-a-service? Obviously, when you're dealing with front ends, you really only want, if you're primarily a front end developer, you really only want to focus on one thing, and that's making a beautifully crafted front end. If you're busy writing React, if your expertise lies in writing React, then you certainly don't want to be dealing with Nginx restarting on you, Apache complaining about plugins, or really any of the other bevy of issues that arise when dealing with server technology. So we allow you to run a full server-free application. You have to do 0 installation and 0 server-side coding to get started. We work best with Angular and Ionic applications, and one of the original targets of Backend was to provide pure Backend as a service for Angular applications. But really, we've grown beyond that, and we give web access to a truly powerful REST API built directly on top of your database that can be accessed from really any framework. And we'll walk through some examples of that later in this presentation. Ionic also Ionic framework, if you're not familiar, is great for creating the same experience across multiple platforms. When I run through the demo, I'm going to run the same application in both the browser and on an iOS simulator, so you can see that it maintains a visual similarity while sharing the same code and the same server functionality. Our second question, why should we use Backend? Well, as with any backend as a service provider, you're going to be given an API that allows you to access your data. That API will be built on top of some kind of data store, which you typically don't have to pay for at the free tier. Why it's called free, but as that scales along their traffic, you're going to end up paying more money. A lot of backend providers will offer server-side logic as well as file storage and user management. But we feel that Backend has a lot of other features that help set us apart. So let's look at some of this in more depth. The first item is how we deal with data models. All of your data models are built on top of Amazon RDS, and we give you all of the connection information you need to connect directly to your Amazon RDS instance. So when you build a model using our very easy to use and very readable Json schema editing, will automatically create the database, and we automatically generate the RESTful API based around your database. Furthermore, when you change that data model, say as your application evolves or you add new objects, we automatically update that RESTful API and completely take the guesswork out of having to build a URL over the top of your database. We also offer you the capability to execute server-side logic. Most backend as a service providers want to be very fast content delivery, very fast data delivery, but tend to tend to restrict what you can do on the server. With Backend, you can run custom JavaScript from within the server context. You can execute them either via a custom trigger by hitting a URL directly to execute your script, or you can hook them up to any of the basic CRUD database transaction elements. For example, you can run JavaScript during the creation of a new element, or after the deletion of an existing element, you can execute a custom trigger. And then, as mentioned, most backend-as-a-service providers offer user management and social login. With Backend, we also give you GitHub, Facebook, and Google integration. And recently, we launched Twitter integration, so you can hook your Twitter account up to Backend and use that to control your application. We also offer, through the offices of our third-party JavaScript, through our server-side JavaScript functionality, the ability to integrate with various third parties. You'll see a short list here, things like Segment, S3, Mandrill, Stripe, and PayPal, but really anything that can be accessed via $HTTP or via a simple web call can be integrated with our server-side JavaScript, allowing you to very easily do things like use Stripe to create a secure payments platform. We also offer real-time communication functionality. We use Socket.io to open up socket-based communication with your app, so you can subscribe and publish events based on the actions taken by your app. Say, for example, you're building an email inbox reader. Every time a new message is received in the database, you can send a notification to all of the subscribed apps to indicate that there's a new message to be retrieved from the server, or even dynamically conduct that retrieval when the message is received. We also offer hosting, which is really useful, especially if you're prototyping or quickly iterating, or really just don't want to deal with the mess of having to find your own hosting provider up until the point where you're ready to launch your app. With Backend, you never have to worry about hosting. We'll store and run all your files in the cloud, and allow you to run all your client code, as well as, of course, managing your server-side code and database through the Backend-as-a-service. All right, our third question is, what works the best with Backend? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Backend was originally developed as targeted towards Angular web apps, and we're slowly expanding that scope. But right now, our best supported frameworks are by far Angular and Ionic. We have an Angular SDK and several integrated Ionic examples. We also offer the capability to migrate from Parse in case you got bit by Parse deciding to shut down earlier in January. We offer a very easy to use migration tool. Simply create a new app, pull in your schema, pull your data down from Parse, and then you're up and running with a backend powered web service that will allow you to just pick up right where you left off. Our fourth question is, can I make an Angular 2 or Ionic 2 application with Backend? The simple answer is yes. Let's take a look at Ionic 2. There's no strict relationships between Backend and Ionic. We're not plugging into any specific framework. We're not leveraging any UI elements. In the future, we'll have an SDK, but at the moment, we don't have one, and that's more focused on Angular anyway. By leveraging intelligent component creation, with components being one of the primary benefits of Ionic 2, allowing you to very easily organize reusable elements from your app, you can use that to encapsulate backend communications and start to create full stack drop-ins that could be really useful for rapid application development. We can also use Typescript to enforce client-side data restrictions. This will help to remove pretty much any need for data validation in terms of validating the data type before it goes to the database, and save a lot of headaches when it comes to server-based communication. With Angular 2, as I mentioned, we currently don't have an SDK yet. It's under active development, and before long, a lot of the code that you see when I get to the next question will essentially evaporate and be handled by the SDK, meaning that what is already going to be a very small amount of code to connect to backend will become even smaller and easier to use. Once again, with Angular's, as you look into it, a lot of Ionic 2's benefits are driven by the Angular 2 benefits that underpin them, because Ionic 2 is built on top of Angular. And the other thing here is the use of components in Angular 2, which allows you for easy packaging of backend-driven functionality. You write it once, you port it multiple times, and once you have an individual standalone server component, then you're set for any application that wants to use that. Again, TypeScript can be used to enforce data type security for your object relational model by hand. In the future, we're going to add automated support for that, and I'll get to that in just a moment. again, as backend offers a RESTful API built on top of your data model, and that RESTful API simply needs the correct authentication headers to communicate, you can really connect with backend from any web framework. So right now, just to recap, the backend support for Angular 2 and Ionic 2 is that we are a RESTful API contactable over the web, so you don't have to worry about any framework-specific oddities or any framework-specific functionality. So as I mentioned, we have nothing Angular Ionic 1.x specific. So if you have an existing application about the existing Angular 1 application, you want to migrate that to Angular 2, all you would really need to do is swap out a few of the basic API calls or the SDK calls to have your application connect to your backend. And we also offer very straightforward web API. It uses repeatable patterns. It's very easy to understand where everything's coming from. And at every level of the application on the dashboard, we provide example code that you can use to integrate what you're doing with your application. In terms of future support for Angular 2 and Ionic 2, and this is all under very heavy development right now, and I would expect to see something along these lines very shortly. We're currently actively developing an Angular 2 SDK. We're also building out a library for templates and starters that can give you a starting point for your application that's leveraging backend and really minimize the amount of code that you need to write. We're also working on reusable client and server integration, allowing you to do things like have full stack components, as in you would drop this component into your application and you're instantly connected to the server and have your entire application ready to go. And then finally, we're looking at automatically generating TypeScript for your ORM. When we rebuild your RESTful API, we're doing that using database reflection, and we're going to leverage that to also generate TypeScript templates for each of your objects in your application. So 5th question, how do I use it? I suspect this is a part a lot of you have been waiting for. So we're going to look at how to use backend with an Angular 2 and Ionic 2 application using a TypeScript example. And there are 5 steps that are needed to get up and running with backend. The first is that you need to create a service class to encapsulate the backend functionality. Second is you set the base URL for your application. Third is you set up authentication to make sure that whoever is connecting to your application is able to be doing what they say they're supposed to be doing. Then step 4 is to set up the object request. This will allow you to interact using HTTP keywords, using standard HTTP keywords via a RESTful interface with your objects. And then step 5 is, there is no step 5. You run the application and you're up and running with a full stack web app. So let's take a look at step 1, which is creating the backend service. There should be nothing surprising here. We're really just creating a class called backend service. It's going to be used throughout the rest of our app. Now we set the base URL. All apps in backend share a URL, and we differentiate between which app is being connected based on the authentication information provided. So this base URL will always be the same, https api.backend.com. And for those of you who are trying to keep track of this code, don't worry, I'm going to run through a full code example and do a code walkthrough upon completion of about 2 more slides. So please bear with me. So step 3 is to set up authentication. Backend offers 3 methods to authenticate your users for your application. First, there's anonymous authentication, which is absolutely the easiest way to get up and running quickly. You simply set your auth status to OK, create an auth token header called anonymous token, and then you provide an application token that is specific to your application. And I'll walk through how to obtain this shortly. The second option is to specify a username and password and use Backend's native user registration and security functionality. Through this, you simply specify your credentials and then supply them as part of each web request that you send to Backend. Finally, we offer social media integration, as mentioned before. Using this, you can use basic functionality to connect with Facebook, connect with Google, connect with Twitter, and use that as your authentication method for your application. We're not going to cover that method today, but there are lots of documents on backend.com that show how to implement this kind of registration, as well as lots of examples on our GitHub page. So step 4 is to set up the object requests. These are the requests that will deal with modifying, updating, deleting, and creating your data. So here's a very simple web request. What this does is it fetches a list of to-do objects from your application's back end. So as you see, we specify the authentication header, and we specify the URL to connect to. One thing you'll see here is the .retry. One of the great things about Angular 2 is that it builds in automated retry, but it also uses an observable pattern as opposed to a promise. So whereas with a promise, if you navigated away from the page, you would continue to receive that request even if it was no longer necessary, thus impacting the performance of your application. With the observable, once you navigate away, you can unregister that callback and thus not have to worry about requests that you simply don't care about anymore. And this can be really useful when doing things like dealing with infinite scroll and navigation among different items there. So the URL format for every object in Backend is going to be very straightforward. It's going to be the base URL plus 1/object/ your object name. And that object name is defined in the UI. It's basically your database's table name. And once we have all of that, we're ready to start running through the app. So let's take a look at what this looks like in an actual application. Allow me to switch to Sublime Text here. I'm going to make the text just a little bigger, there we go. And what we're looking at here is a TypeScript example of a backend service class. We'll run through and we see we create the service and our constructor. We set our base API URL here on line 16, and we set our app name. This is used for user-based authentication, and we also build our default auth token value. Right now, this is going to be empty. Then when we're working with this application, we're going to offer two distinct connection methods. So let me bring up the application to show what this looks like at the moment. So right now I'm just using Ionic Serve to start up a simple web server, and I'll bring up the application in a new website. So it'll take just a minute to load because the video conferencing is slowly destroying my bandwidth. And there we go. All right, so we offer a number of means to test functionality here. So we have two different methods of authentication here, as well as a very quick CRUD UI. So let's use anonymous authentication to fetch our list of items. So we can get our list of items directly from the server, and we see that we already have some data populated. Now, if we want to add a new item to this, call it new world to do, and we hit post item. What's happened here is that we've updated the UI with the new object that has been created on the server. We've also sent this to the server database, and this is now recorded in posterity for all other consumers of your application. And I'll walk through what that looks like in just a moment. So right now we're using anonymous authentication. You can also use token-based authentication, which is essentially username and password login. As we see again, we're now using token authentication. We use get items, and we're now logged in as a user of the application. And as such, we can still see all the data. So we can also go to our list, and we've implemented, using Backend, a very quick way to search. For example, sorry, the type ahead is a little jumping ahead of me. We can quickly search for items that say world. We can search for items that say to do, and we'll see items come up. And this is all communicating live with your server. So this is a really very powerful tool. So once we've searched our to-do list, we can very easily pull up objects, and we can then do whatever we need to with them over the web. So let's go back to the code. So as I mentioned before, we're demonstrating two different authentication methods, and that all boils down to how we build the credentials object and the header. So with anonymous authentication, we're calling this method here, use anonymous auth. We can take a look at what that looks like in TypeScript here. So we see that we have a method use anonymous auth that calls directly to backend service, and that's called from the HTML from the login handler right here, use anonymous auth. And with that simple addition of the attribute to the HTML element, we've connected our entire application to the database. So let's say that we want to fetch a list of objects. Take a look again at what's going on in here, and you'll have to forgive some of these variable names. This was an in-progress app that was kind of somewhat quickly ported over to make this. To incorporate this webinar. So we have a method called getQuote, where if we go and look at the TypeScript, we see that it simply subscribes to the getQuote method in backend service. If we go look at backend service and look at the getQuote method, we see a very easy example of how to fetch a list of objects. We simply append the we append the object URL here to the API URL and provide our authentication header, and then the result will return all of the objects listed. By default, we offer pagination, which is why with our example, when I called new world, or I created the new world object, it wasn't returned immediately. Let's take a look at this with an application that doesn't have a lot of data in there and won't hit that limit. So we are in the Typescript file, and we see here we have an anonymous token value here. This originates from your application, and let's walk through how to get at that now. So here I am at the Backend dashboard. This is provided for every application, and you see we have a very simple list set up. We have to-do, we have items, you have users. By default, every Backend application is given this items table and this users table. You can take a look at what's in these here. So if we expand the objects item, we click on to-do, and this will once again apologize for the slow bandwidth. This will finish loading in just a moment. You see we have some very basic objects, and using this interface we can very quickly manipulate what's on our server side. So we can add a new item very quickly. We can edit an existing item. And every time that we make a change, you can see over here on the right, we're seeing an example of the code that was executed in order to execute each of these updates. For example, here's all of the code that you need to perform the update that we just completed. This can be a great template for your application. Anyway, to get at where the authentication is handled, you go to Security and Auth, you go to Configuration, and within this configuration tab, you see right here at the top, anonymous access. I have it enabled for my demo application, and it provides me an anonymous token. This is a GUID that uniquely identifies your connection with the application. Since this is publicly accessible, meaning anybody who can access your application can use it, you typically want to make sure to assign the user a fairly restrictive role. In this case, we might want to think about a read-only role. As this is just a demo and there's not really anything important going on here, I'll just use this anonymous token for now and just turn off anonymous access later so nobody can go hacking my application. So let me go back to the TypeScript. I'll change the header value. So I've already pasted it in, but just so that it's clear, just pasting in the existing value I took from the website. Save the TypeScript, then go back here, and I want to compile the application. So NTSC is the Node TypeScript compiler. This takes all of that TypeScript, compiles it into JavaScript that can then be run wherever. Should finish shortly. When that's done, we do a webpack to publish the application to the app folder. That'll take just a moment. So once this is completed, we'll be able to bring up the application, and here we go. Once again, using Ionic serve. This will bring up a new instance of the application in the browser. Here we go. This will take just another moment to load. Make sure nothing's broken. All right. Anyway, while this is loading, I'm going to fire up another tab, and here we go. Of course, it loads the moment that I navigate away. So it always seems to be how it is. So let's use anonymous authentication to fetch our list of items. You see in here, now we see our new list of items. So we can now see that this is directly related to what's going on in the back end. So if we go back here, and we go back to our data grid, wait for this to pull up for a moment. So now we can update one of our objects once it's rendered the data grid. Here we go. And let's say we want to call other new world Alpha Centauri. We'll save that. You see the calls happening here. Now let's go back to our application. We refresh the data, and here we've changed to Alpha Centauri. We can also add a new planet or a new to-do item. We see that it's published here. We go back, we refresh our data grid. I should have just used the refresh button provided, but out of habit I refreshed the page. I apologize for that. Wait for this to finish loading, just a moment. In the meantime, I'm going to spin up the Angular simulator, or the iOS simulator, because that will take a little bit as well. So when this finishes loading, and just to assure you, this does not usually take this long. I'm streaming video, audio, and my screen at the moment, so my poor Comcast-powered router is really starting to complain, and I apologize for that. All right, so that will bring up the emulator, and this will finish loading. You see here that we've added Visit Mars. So what we've really done here is with just maybe 15, 20 lines of code, we've hooked up our Angular 2 and Ionic 2 application right up to a backend that is fully built out for us, and now there's no work left to do to get your application's data published to all your users. So let's see where that. Okay, this is going to end up taking a while because it has to do the entire compile. So let me make sure I can end all processes so I'm not causing any problems. All right. So as that finishes, I will come back here. So that's Backend in a nutshell. We allow you to very quickly accelerate your application's development and to quickly add a backend that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to do any server coding. You'll see there to add a new object, to add an existing object, even to enable secure authentication. We didn't have to add a single line of code on the back end. We simply used what was already there, configured our application to connect to it, and we were ready to go. Let's see, the emulator is still not ready to go. So in the meantime, I will throw up this. So I want to thanks a lot for your time. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds for the emulator to fire up. But in the meantime, you can hit our GitHub page at github.com/backend. There are lots of great examples, mostly focused on Angular 1 and Ionic 1, but we have Angular 2 and Ionic 2 examples coming. And you can also visit backend.com. From there, you can access our contact page to find out our Twitter handle, find us on Facebook, find us on G+, or you can send us direct emails. We're from top to bottom, we're very friendly people, and we just want to help developers do what they do best. So let me pull this over here. It looks like we have the simulator up. It's going to take just another moment to bring up the application. So in the meantime, I'll address some questions that have arisen.
Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to add them into the comments.
And I'm going to turn off my screen sharing until that starts.
Yep, no worries. So Musin was wondering, can you run an emulation build Ionic run iOS?
Yep, I am currently running an emulation build. It's just taking forever to start up because of so much going on the machine.
And then how is Firebase different? How is it different than Firebase or Angular Fire?
Well, one of the key differences from Firebase are, aside from the basic, in that Firebase is built on top of NoSQL, Backend is built on top of relational databases. But one of the things that we do right off the bat that's different from Firebase is that we give you direct and full access to your Amazon RDS instance. So for each application, we're creating a new database in Amazon RDS. We give you the server name, and we give you the server name, we give you the username, we give you the password. So if you want to plug it into another application, you want to put pgadmin in front of it, or if you want to even say goodbye to Backend and go somewhere else, we give you the capability to do so. Additionally, some of our features are a bit beyond what Firebase has offered, much as many of their features are ahead of what we're offering. For example, our real-time database communications is something that I think Firebase has really only added recently, where we've had it for a little while now. And also our capability and the breadth of server-side JavaScript code that we allow you to execute tends to be more robust than what you'll find on Firebase. All right, Let's see other questions here. Or let's see if this application. Nope, nope, still loading. So scrolling down, scrolling down. So okay. So I'm still trying to find the next questions. All right, can I run an emulation build? All right, that's currently running. It's just loading up. Crazy thought here, but do you have any plans to integrate? This is a great question, and the answer is yes. We do have plans to integrate with Ionic Creator. They're currently underway. We don't have anything to show at the moment, but we are building out a library of functionality. We have several starters already available on Ionic's web repo if you go to Ionic's website. So Stephen asks, you mentioned Json Schema earlier, which is standard of building and validating JSON. Do you fully support JSON Schema? I was being a bit cavalier with my language here. It's a JSON formatted database schema. So it's so we offer a well-formed written in JSON method of specifying a relational database. But in terms of a standard of building and validating JSON, we do basic JSON validation, but we're not doing anything extremely complex along those lines. We just have a specific subset that we use to drive things like how to establish a foreign key relationship, how to establish a new object and data types. Your second question was, you can authenticate users, but do you have the ability to write rules around which users can control which records? That's also an excellent question. The answer is absolutely yes. I'm going to share my screen a moment so I can walk you a bit through. Actually, Tracy, I know I'm running a bit short on time. Is it all right if I take a couple more minutes, or do we need to move on?
Yeah, no, of course. Go ahead.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. I'm just going to share my browser window. And we can go look at the backend dashboard. And you see here in the security and auth section, we can pull up security templates. So every time you register a user, you can assign a security template to that user. And each security template controls how you can access various items in the database. For example, we have a read-only role for users that only allows users to read applications. We also have a user role that is essentially no different from the admin role. This is very bad web development practice, and I'll take my 30 lashings later, but right now it's the easiest way to get a demo up and running. So we give our user role full access, and then when we go back to our configuration, when we specify that role, we specify it here when we specify anonymous access. You can also go into an individual object and edit its access per user. So once we load the object tab, then we can access the security section of the object. Once again, I am stymied by slow internet. Just a moment. Here we go. Navigate to security. So we see down at the bottom we have security template. We can override the security template on a per object basis, giving us full control over every object in our database should we need it. All right, so let's go back and see if there's any other questions or if the application's up and running. All right, so the application's starting now, so I'll field a couple more questions. Let me see. So you advertise for AngularJS, but can backend be used with other front ends, or are y'all doing something in particular only for Angular? We can be used with anything that can hit a web URL, just flat out. The method that we demonstrated today by setting up the authentication and setting as headers on the requests is usable from any language. You can do it in React, you can do it in Angular, you can do it in jQuery, you could even do it in Cold Fusion if for some reason you wanted to. We focus our SDK development efforts at the moment on Angular and on Angular applications. So there's going to be a lot more support along those lines, but we have a lot of support planned for other frameworks coming. The only problem we face is that there's just so many hours in the day and just so many people working for backend at the moment. So let me see. Any plans to support GraphDB? Not that I'm aware of, but if you follow backend and send an email to our support, I'm sure they can give you a much more detailed answer than I'm able to provide on that. Let me see if there's any other questions. Okay. All right, so let's see if there is, okay, the app is not running. So I'm going to assume that I'm having trouble running the application because of the web. So let me see if I can run it once more. I'm going to share my screen so that if I fail, it's on record. So stop screen sharing. Let's see, share screen. Share the screen, the iOS, share. So hopefully you're seeing the iOS build. It's a loading application, and this doesn't seem to want to behave right now. Let me try, instead of emulate, let me try just running it in the simulator. And of course, it's not a demo if something doesn't work. All I can really say at this moment is I promise you that it does load in the emulator. Unfortunately, there are things conspiring against me at the moment to make that a little challenging to demonstrate. But you can go to, if you go to Backand's GitHub page, we have several examples where we offer integration with Ionic and Angular that will allow you to run that in the emulator. I'm just unable to demonstrate that at the moment. So anyway, I'm going to throw up the slide again for me, and thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. If you guys want to reach Backend on Twitter, it's at Backend_, and I'll put it in the notes for you. There you go. And they're pretty active, so I see a bunch of tweets right now. So if you guys do have any questions after this, please feel free to reach out to them.